Well, thank you, Randy, and thanks, Chris. Hello, everybody. We also enjoyed the sort of peace and quiet of COVID, though it would have been very, very nice to meet all of you in person. So that is kind of a pity. Plus, I think in the end, the presentation was more work than it would have been in person. So I'm Tim Luecke. I'm from Cologne, Germany. I studied political science at Chicago in college and got my PhD at the Ohio State University. And then I was at the Mershon Center actually for a couple of years as a postdoc and also managing editor of International Theory. But now I'm back in Germany. I work here for a small communications design company as a consultant. And this is my partner and partner in crime as well, Sonja.
Hi, I'm Sonja, and I'm a professional photographer and illustrator. And I used to work for several radio stations like BFBS and as the British Forces Broadcasting Service, and WDR, which is the equivalent for the BBC Radio 1, and I was very, very lucky to take pictures of people like David Bowie and Genesis and the Police, and yeah, I still enjoy doing this, and of course I do other stuff as well, like working with this brilliant man.
well, enough of that. So yeah, we also founded a startup together called TRANSATLANTIKA. So just you don't get confused with the title there on the second page. And this actually grew out of the project we're presenting today. TRANSATLANTIKA sort of offers consulting. We do research, we do publishing, and also events. And we do want to cooperate with programs such as the one Randy is running for the Koch Foundation and also with the Mershon Center. So we'll hopefully we'll have more opportunities to work together in the future. So on that note, we want to thank Randy tons and the program for the study of realist foreign policy. We started this project with some crowdfunding, which was a big pain in the ass, if I may say. And Randy was basically the first one to secure us any institutional funding, which was quite a big relief. Thanks also again, Chris Jalpi at the Mershon Center for also organizing and hosting this. And thank you all for attending. So we have a multimedia presentation. So what I will do now is basically share my screen, and if you have any problems, there's the chat function you can ask, but you should all mute yourself while we play this. So we're going to play the presentation. It's a bit longer. It's 40 minutes. So, you know, get comfy.
And enjoy the video.
We'll return to the Q&A.
Just one thing, go to the top of your screen when they share, and you can fit the video to your screen. You'll see a thing at the top of your screen as soon as they share. Yeah, you see, it says view options at the top. Hit that, go to zoom ratio or whatever. Yeah, fit to window or whatever. Yeah.
So one more thing. Yes. I can mute it, right? All right, let's get started. Oh, hello there. Today we will talk about our book and multimedia project, The Crisis of the West, Part 1, Why Trump? This project began in 2018 and is still ongoing. We plan to publish the book in early 2021. The motivating question for the project is, why do people in the United States believe that Donald Trump was elected president? This initial question serves primarily as a hook for some of the deeper questions that we want to address. For example, What are some of the underlying grievances that explain why such a seemingly unlikely candidate like Donald Trump could become president? Why is there this increasing polarization in the United States? And very importantly, are there still some things that Americans share which can provide the foundations for a bridge across the divide and reunite the United States of America? Why Trump is part one of a trilogy we call The Crisis of the West. Brexit and the rise of populism across Europe suggest that what we observe in the United States is part of a larger phenomenon that cuts across the entire West. The big question that we want to address in this project is therefore, why is it that the people who live in the wealthiest and most secure nations on the planet also seem to be the most unhappy and divided ones? Part 2 and 3 of our larger project will therefore focus on the cases of Germany and the UK, in order to determine whether there are any patterns that cut across Western nations. Today, however, we will focus on Part 1 and the United States. We will talk about the following things. First, what do we do? Second, why did we do it? What motivated us to undertake this massive project? Third, how did we do it? There we will talk about the methods we employed. Fourth, we will briefly touch on some of the results. And finally, we will talk about how all of this relates to the topic of this conference, the future of U.S. grant strategy. So, stay tuned. All right, let me get started by first talking about what we actually did. In early June 2018, Sonja and I took a plane from Düsseldorf, Germany to Newark Airport. We got ourselves a rental car and drove across the United States from the East Coast to the West Coast for a total of 6,213 miles, or 10,000 kilometers. We began our journey in Kingston, upstate New York. From there, we headed down to New York City, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C. Then we cut across Pennsylvania and made our way through the Midwest via Columbus and Kalamazoo, Michigan, to Chicago. Next, we crossed the Mississippi and drove for almost 1,000 miles through the cornfields of Iowa and Nebraska until we reached Denver, Colorado. The scenery changed dramatically once we entered the Rocky Mountains in order to get to our next destination, Utah. Setting up camp for a couple of days in Moab, we took excursions into the stunning national parks of Arches and Canyonland. In Ivins, Utah, our hosts lent us one of their high-clearance SUVs and sent us on a rather adventurous day trip to Toro Weep Overlook, an incredibly remote part of the Grand Canyon. After that, we needed a couple days off and settled into the Bellagio Hotel in Las Vegas, before venturing out into the scorching heat of Death Valley. Leaving Death Valley behind, we continued our way west to California. After a brief stop visiting some very big trees and encountering some rather peaceful black bears in Sequoia National Park, we made our way to Oakland and San Francisco. The final stretch of the trip led us down Highway 1 along the Pacific coast, which is rightfully considered to be one of the most scenic drives in the United States, until we reached Los Angeles, 2.5 months after we had arrived on the East Coast. As you can imagine, this was a trip of a lifetime. Not only had we traveled through some incredible landscapes, but almost more importantly, during our entire trip, we had not encountered a single unfriendly person, not even a grumpy gas station attendant. So the night we drove back from the airport to our apartment in Cologne, Sonja, who had never been to the States before and was more of a UK fan, said, with tears in her eyes that she missed everyone already and wanted to go back for more. And so we did. In the winter of 2018 and the spring of 2019, we did another 2 short trips to the East Coast, and we would have been back this year, but, well, you know. Over the course of our trips across the United States, we conducted a total of 47 interviews. In addition, we did 1 interview via Skype and 1 with an American living in Berlin. We will do the 50th and final interview before the end of this year. Each interview lasted about 1 hour, and we will end up with 500 to 600 pages of interview transcripts. Our interview partners came from all over the country and from all walks of life. To give you an idea of the breadth of people we interviewed, let me introduce some of them briefly. First, we have Hector Sosa, a very enthusiastic activist, here seen in front of the White House. Henry Now, one of the few self-professed conservative IR and foreign policy scholars in the US. He also served on the National Security Council under President Reagan. Alexei Vla, on the right, a nurse taking care of elderly patients in Columbus, Ohio, and his partner, Isaiah, who manages a local thrift store. Martha Nussbaum, who was kind enough to make room in her busy schedule to sit down with us for an interview in her office at the University of Chicago Law School. She's one of the most accomplished philosophers of our time. The Flex Crew, a terrific reggae band which has performed every Sunday for the last 2 decades in Columbus and which is famous throughout the entire Midwest. John and Mary Lou Block, who have started their own grass-fed beef business on parts of the old farm of Mary Lou's father near Gothenburg, Nebraska. They also rent out a beautiful little cabin via Airbnb, which is how we met them. Tom Schultz, a prolific artist who is living and working in an old warehouse situated in one of the rougher parts of Oakland. Aside from having much to say about Donald Trump, he also shared fascinating stories of his time with Franz Klein and other artists in 1970s New York. Ian Bonner, one of my best former students at Ohio State University. Since that time, he has switched politically from right to left, but remains in essence a libertarian. After the interview, he introduced us to his collection of historic guns that he keeps in a massive vault and took us shooting at a local gun range. Samuel Goldman, professor at George Washington University, and one of the few conservative thinkers who does not support Trump. He also loves punk rock. And Anna Klumsky, who began her acting career with the movie My Girl in 1991, and who has recently starred as the character Amy Bruckheimer in the polit satire Veep. She also holds a Bachelor in International Studies from the University of Chicago. But of course we did more than just conduct interviews. During our initial road trip alone, Sonja took more than 50,000 photos, both of the people we interviewed and the places we traveled through. In addition, we recorded more than 400 videos. Here you see Sonja giving me a minor heart attack, taking pictures on the edge of the Grand Canyon. And here she is directing Horacio Chavez, who I met in college, and his friends for a photo shoot in LA. There are moments in life which take on a special meaning and importance only long after they have passed, but then they ingrain themselves deep into one's long-term memory. This was one of those moments. In March 2016, a renowned scholar of international relations and political thought from the University of Sussex in the UK was visiting Columbus to give a talk at the Mershon Center. I was invited to attend a dinner with her and a number of students and faculty. During dinner, the conversation turned to the presidential elections, which were already in full swing. The professor from the UK was very concerned that Donald Trump might have a chance to win the presidency. Some of the faculty and I strongly disagreed. With big smiles and feeling very comfortably about our views, we tried to reassure her that there was no way in the world that this man, who had no political experience and who was only known for his TV appearances, would be able to win against someone like Hillary Clinton. At some point, I even said, Americans might be crazy at times, but they're not that crazy. And I hate to admit it, but I think I even betted her a case of champagne in case that Donald Trump would become president. Well, 8 months later, I looked like a rather big idiot, and I believe that I still owe someone in Sussex a case of champagne. The day after the election of 2016, the world was in shock, and it was also in awe. Donald Trump had won the election to become the 45th President of the United States. Even on the day of the election, Nate Silver's forecast on 538, one of the most respected forecasting sites in the US, had given Donald Trump only a 28.6% chance of winning, compared to a 71.4% chance for Hillary Clinton. Basically, none of the established surveys, pollsters, forecasts, and media pundits had predicted that Donald Trump would be able to win this election. But then, he won. What had happened? How was it possible that one of the most seasoned, experienced, and clearly capable politicians in the country, Hillary Clinton, could lose against a business tycoon who was most famous for the sentence, "You're fired"? In short, why Trump? One rather easy and obvious answer to that question is that many Americans were tired and fed up with the established political system. A lot of the people who voted for Trump clearly did so out of sheer protest. The more difficult question to answer, however, is what exactly were they frustrated about? What were they protesting? People, of course, have always been frustrated with politics and protested various issues, such as the establishment, the influence of money in politics, or the abuses of power. So what was different this time? Clearly, the pollsters and experts had been missing something. Maybe the pollsters asked the wrong questions. Maybe the experts had looked at the wrong sources and talked to the wrong people. These were the thoughts that kept bugging me for the next few months. And I started to develop the idea that I should drive across the United States and ask the people who had decided this election, the American voters, myself. Then, in the winter of 2017, a friend of mine dragged me to a concert in a tiny venue in Cologne called the Tsunami Club. This is where I met Sonja for the first time. That evening, I told her about my idea of traveling through the United States to interview people about why they believed Donald Trump had become president. Having just met me an hour earlier, Sonja said, "Sounds like you need a photographer." "I'm a photographer. I will come with you." And this is how this project started. One thing that distinguishes this project from others is the unique combination of interviews and photographs. I am going to talk about the benefits of each in turn and then illustrate how we put them together. The interviews followed what is called a semi-structured qualitative style, which means that I began by asking some initial questions and then asked follow-up questions as the conversation developed. I started every interview with a single sheet of paper and about 10 questions. Most of the time, I only used 4 or 5 of those because the conversation developed so quickly that additional questions suggested themselves. In general, I had to do very little talking during the interviews, since our respondents seemed almost relieved to have an opportunity to voice their opinions and thoughts. They simply appreciated the fact that someone was finally willing to listen to them. One benefit of interviews is therefore that they allow people to explain and justify their reasons in much more detail than they could possibly do in a survey. The second benefit of this approach is that it provides an opportunity to discover questions and answers that one did not consider prior to the interview. And as you can see from my notes, there were a lot of those cases. While those advantages of qualitative interviews are fairly well known to most social scientists, there is another important benefit of conducting these types of interviews. Asking people to think about what motivates others to make certain political choices forces them to put themselves in their shoes, to empathize with the other. Having to think about the actual reasons that people of the opposite political camp have for their actions and opinions in the context of an interview, therefore fosters mutual understanding. In this way, the interviews serve our goal of bringing Americans back together and restarting the conversation, rather than dividing them even further. We have made extensive use of photographs in this project. They serve a function that goes far beyond merely adding an aesthetic element. Photos of the people we interviewed and their surroundings provide an additional lens into their habitus. The term habitus was made famous by the French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu, and it denotes a person's skills, attitudes, habits, and dispositions. Importantly, the habitus can be deciphered via a person's physical appearance, how they dress, how they move, how they carry themselves. It can therefore be described as a form of embodied culture. So, photographs provide an additional access to the habitus of the people we have talked to. They thereby help the reader to better understand who we talked to, why they said the things they said, and how their statements fit into the larger schemes of their lives. Sonja accomplished this by not only taking photographs throughout the interviews, but also by taking photos of the interviewees' immediate environment, such as the interior of their homes. The second important function of the photos is less scientific, but maybe even more important. Photographs are an effective way to humanize the political discourse, to put flesh around the text of the interview, so to speak. They allow us to show that all of our interview partners, no matter if they support or oppose Donald Trump, are first and foremost human beings, with their own fears, hopes, and dreams. We consider this an important way to start overcoming the polarizing effects of media and social media discourses. One way Sonja realized this potential of photographs was by compiling sequences of interview situations that show the emotional reactions of our respondents during the conversation. For example, here you see Anna Klumsky in a very expressive series of photos. Another example is this photo of John Block in Nebraska, who proudly presents how nature beats machine by showing us how a small plant made its way through his Ford pickup truck. The third reason we have relied so heavily on photos is that we wanted to bring to the fore the unifying beauty of American nature and architecture. While Americans are politically divided, most of them share at least one common denominator: their love for the stunning beauty of their country. Photographically capturing the incredible skylines of cities such as New York or Chicago, the wide open spaces of the Great Plains, the wilderness of the West, or the mesmerizing vistas onto the Pacific Ocean is a worthy endeavor in and of itself. Yet, it also serves our goal of bringing Americans back together. So let us show you some quick examples of how we put text and photographs together in the book. Those are still drafts of the final versions, but the general format will stay the same. Each interview section starts with a large black and white portrait and a short introduction about the person we talk to. The remainder consists of excerpts of the interview itself, with additional photos interspersed throughout. Most journalists or scholars usually draw on interviews as a form of data and then write their own text. We decided consciously to print abbreviated parts of the interviews themselves. This way, the reader can form her own opinion, and we don't occupy the role of experts who pick and choose interview statements to support their own preferred and pre-established opinions. In addition, many of our interview partners noted the feeling that their voices are not being heard in the current public debate, or that their opinions are being misrepresented. Printing their responses in more or less their original form, therefore, provides those people with a voice of their own. In the book, the interview sections are broken up with short descriptions and photos of the locations that we traveled through. This allows us to tell a narrative of the journey we have undertaken and to display photos of some of the great places along the way. Now, let me talk about some of our initial results. Running the risk of disappointing you right off the bat, this project does not yield a single answer as to why Donald Trump was elected. There's clearly and unsurprisingly no monocausal explanation. However, this is also not the goal of this project. Instead, we want to problematize the very idea of seemingly simple answers and encourage the reader to start reflecting on the problems that we are facing by engaging with the interviews that we conducted. In addition, we haven't completed the book yet, and it would be premature to present our conclusion at this point. But even when the book is published, the interviews we have collected will provide plenty of food for thought for the years to come. But to keep you not entirely in the dark, let me venture out and discuss some first observations. While there is no clear-cut single explanation, there are obviously patterns in the responses that we got from our interview partners. When it comes to the more approximate causes, a large number of people expressed that they thought Hillary Clinton had simply been the wrong candidate. Not because she was a woman, as many pointed out, but because she clearly constitutes the establishment politician par excellence. Others pointed to the fact that Donald Trump was far more present in the media. Ironically, many suggested that the New York Times was partially responsible for his election, since the paper continuously fell for his constant stream of crass statements and policy directives. There also seems to be almost a consensus on some of the deeper underlying factors that explain his election. People from both sides of the aisle said that a lot of Americans today feel threatened in their way of life, that they are scared or angry. Some argued that the reasons for that fear and anger are cultural. Others pointed at economic causes, such as the growing income gap or the disappearance of manufacturing jobs. Pretty much everyone agreed, though, that career politicians and the established parties are ill-equipped or not willing to adequately respond to these fears. When it comes to the question of polarization, there was almost an overwhelming consensus that social media play an excessively corrosive role, for example, by creating echo chambers. In addition, respondents from both sides of the aisle agreed that the majority of the established media including well-respected papers such as the Washington Post or the New York Times, are increasingly moving away from neutral and bipartisan news reporting towards pandering towards the political views of their paying customers. An analysis of how all these factors hang together and reinforce each other will have to wait for another day. Instead, let me turn to the second objective of this project, namely to develop new questions and hypotheses about the current crisis in the United States and the West in general. As I mentioned earlier, one benefit of the interviews we conducted is that you sometimes get answers that you are not expecting from the people you are talking to. And those answers can change your perspective on things or give rise to new questions that you previously did not consider. We want to provide 3 examples of such instances. First, you will hear an excerpt of the interview with Jason Tang, who works in the finance sector and self-identifies as a libertarian. He has some interesting things to say about the current situation in general and on political correctness in particular. Second, we have a short clip from our interview with Martha Nussbaum. Martha is certainly not a big fan of Donald Trump. Even more surprising, therefore, is what she has to say about the political left in the current situation. And finally, we have Jeremy McCallany, a contractor in Moab, Utah, who is also our Airbnb host. Jeremy once ran for Congress as a member of the Republican Party, and he makes an interesting comparison between Barack Obama and Donald Trump.
I don't know why this disconnect happened, right? Like, I don't know if it's been building for a while, right? I think there's maybe a bunch of different things happening at once, right? You have the financial crisis. You have a lot of their jobs disappearing and like them not having the ability, like we don't have a good way to transition people out of jobs. There's just a bunch of things happening at once.
Mm-hmm. And so you think that's what's scaring people?
I think that's part of it. I think they're seeing their way of life changing.
Mm-hmm.
And not for the better necessarily. And I think a lot of it's also like, not only do they see their way of life changing, they see they're still like, what is the one group that you're allowed to make fun of in America? Like, without any repercussions? It is poor white Americans, right? Right. They're inbred, like whatever, they're poor, they're idiots, they're stupid, right? Like they're all racist. That's okay. And that's like a really weird dynamic, isn't it?
Can you say a bit more about how the left is also complicit in fueling the current crisis?
Yeah, I do think that the left, I mean, it's partly a kind of the flip side of a certain kind of utopian thinking. They want a pure America, and they think of the opposition as dirty, monstrous, polluting, and I think the left has been guilty of misrepresenting the opposition in many respects, just not depicting anyone who voted for Trump as some kind of monster. And I see this in my students. The students, they don't want to talk to any students who voted for Trump. How can you have a class in which, half of the students don't want to speak to the other half? So as a teacher, I do view it as key to my role to produce conversation and real dialogue, but it's harder to do by far than it was before.
Most people, or well, at least most people I've ever talked to, don't recognize the fact that President Trump is the natural progression, the next logical step in our country's election of President Obama. Mm-hmm. So we've had politics as usual for, since basically since Abe Lincoln. We've had politician after politician becoming our presidents, congressmen, senators, and so on and so forth. And then Obama was a different kind of candidate. You've got a 30-year senator in Senator McCain as the Republican nominee, and then you have a relative newcomer didn't even finish a complete term as a state senator in candidate Obama, and then was in his first term as a United States senator from Illinois when he got elected president. And the Democrat nominees he was campaigning against Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, some of these folks were longtime politicians. So what we recognized was candidate Obama had relatively small amount of experience, and by far less than any of his other competitors. And the American people voted for him. And I knew people that hadn't voted Democrat since LBJ that voted for candidate Obama as president. I knew people that were longtime Republicans, they just straight party ticket and they voted for Obama. So that's a pretty good indication that the American people have kind of had it with politics as usual. And then come to 2016, you go forward 8 years after 2 terms with Obama, and you got the same kind of thing, only more so in candidate Trump. And all of the people that he were running against, whether it was Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, or it was Chris Christie, Senator Paul, Senator Cruz, all these other candidates they're basically career politicians, and Donald Trump's never held elected office anywhere at any time. He's never even been on a school board. So you get that type of person out there, and the American people said, well, we want to keep getting away from politics as usual. And I mentioned earlier, in the pollsters, you got different levels of disgruntlement from how they feel about the government, whether it's this particular elected official or that particular one. And the most severe is called that we are madder than hell and not going to take it anymore. And I think the American people have reached that point long ago.
Now, let me briefly discuss how all of this relates to the topic of this conference. Clearly, the focus of this project is not on U.S. grant strategy. However, we actually did ask a number of interviewees about Trump's notion of America first and his plan to reduce U.S. military aid and involvement abroad, especially with regards to Europe and NATO. Those who support Donald Trump generally said, yes, we have been paying long enough for the security of Europe. Given that European nations such as Germany are wealthy enough to provide for their own security, we should reduce our commitment. Those who opposed Trump replied, yes, that sounds like a great idea, but I don't trust Donald Trump that he will actually do it. So, in the end, most Americans that we talk to actually seem to support the idea of reducing the U.S. military presence abroad. A second connection between our project and the future of U.S. grant strategy is the problem of internal divisions. More than a few of our respondents voiced serious concerns that the polarization between political camps would sooner or later end in outbreaks of violence and possibly even in civil war. The events of the last few months give credit to these concerns. Obviously, internal divisions of this kind make a coherent and effective grant strategy difficult, to say the least. Finally, while we focus today on the case of the United States, we do believe that the crisis we observe there does extend across most Western nations, many of which have been allies of the United States for the last few decades. If our hypothesis is correct, there is a chance that it will be difficult to rely on those allies in the future. In general, it seems clear that what we describe as the crisis of the West will continue to define the strategic environment in which U.S. grant strategy plays out. Ignoring it will therefore be to the detriment to anyone trying to defend America's interest in the world, no matter if they're called Joe Biden or Donald Trump. This basically concludes our presentation. However, we don't want to leave you on such a gloomy note. Instead, we will give the final word to one of our interview partners, the wonderful Jeremy McElhenney from Moab, Utah.
If you look at the congressional record, and I'm not as up to date as this probably as I should be, but in 2012, Utah's Congressional District 1, a fellow named Rob Bishop, he voted the most against Nancy Pelosi of any congressman in the United States. You know, Nancy Pelosi was, we'll say she's the extreme right. Rob Bishop was the extreme right. So Rob Bishop voted against Nancy Pelosi more than any other Republican in the nation in 2012. But they voted the same 96% of the time. So these two stalwarts that were opposite ends of the political spectrum agreed 96% of the time. So 4% was the extreme left, extreme right. 4% was things that we needed to talk about. The other 96 were in agreement. So there's so many things that Americans have in common. And it doesn't matter if it's Rob Bishop and Nancy Pelosi. They have almost everything in common. There's just a tiny little bit. I think we should do this. You think we should do that. Well, let's talk about it, and maybe maybe I'll see that your way has some merit, and maybe you'll see my way has some merit, and maybe we can come to something that'll work for both of us. So we have freedom. There's a lot of people in the United States that think that the American dream's gone, where our quality of life has gone down, or whatever it is. You have people that are unemployed with a cell phone. They have a personal computer in their hand. It's got more technology than what launched the space shuttle in 1969. Okay, yeah, that's definitely a hardship. Almost every single home in the United States has a microwave. You know, you can go down to anywhere, grab food, pop it in the microwave, and boom, you have a meal in 5 minutes or 2 minutes or whatever, however many seconds it is. And so this is not a hardship. Having these things, we've got so many comforts. It's frustrating to me when you realize that I have ancestors that had to before labor unions and some of these things, and just to say that they're not getting opportunities now, it's ridiculous. It's absurd. All you've got to do is try. And so we have that. We have freedom. I think a lot of our ambition as a nation has gone down.
Okay.
You know, every generation can't have like the founders. You're not going to have a group of people like George Washington, Ben Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton. You're not going to have a group of people like that come along all the time. But at the same time, you've got great Americans in every walk of life. Unfortunately, I think most of those people don't get into politics. I think most of them people stay as private citizens, and when they do, like John Huntsman was a good example. John Huntsman made a lot of money. John Huntsman's mother and father both passed away from cancer. And John Huntsman said, well, I'm going to eradicate cancer. That's what I'm going to donate my life to. And he created the Huntsman Cancer Institute in Salt Lake. It's the premier cancer institute in the world. And he donated literally billions of his own money there. And billionaires know other billionaires, and got his billionaire friends to donate billions of dollars. And unfortunately, John Huntsman passed away from cancer a couple of years ago. But he dedicated his life to, I think, a worthy cause. And you know, there's so many Americans that do this stuff. Whether it's a leftist organization or an organization on the right, if you recognize that there's some value to it, the generosity, the Houston hurricane here a couple of years ago. We had a guy here locally who was a restaurant owner, the Sunset Grill here in town. He took his catering truck, so he got to hold all the other restaurant owners in town and said, I'm going to go down there. When you guys make your next food order, I don't need money, I need food. So you need to order food that I can take with me to Houston. So he took some employees, he took some volunteers, and he drove his truck down there, and the other restaurant owner gave him food, but you know, he did most of it himself. And he had enough food to feed 10,000 people, 2 meals a day for 10 days.
Wow.
So that was just one small town American that said, these people need help. So that generosity, that basic, and you don't care what political spectrum that person that was now homeless eating, you know, he don't care. And that person that's accepting the food don't care what political persuasion this guy has. But that same basic innate goodness, I think, is still here. Sometimes it's very deep. But I certainly think it's still here. And politicians need to inspire people. But lately they've spent most of their time, energy, and money on tearing people down. Instead of getting that inspiration and why I'm good and why we can be good, it's why this person or that person is bad. And so they just need to fix that. You know, get that optimism going again. So it's a pretty good country. It's a pretty good time to be alive. anywhere in the world. We have opportunities, of quality of life expectancy. We live longer, healthier lives than we ever have before, except for some of the fast food places that we probably need to stay away from. But we have opportunities now that we couldn't do. If it was the 1860s, you get up by candlelight before daylight. You eat whatever it is you had for dinner last night. You eat the leftovers that were probably not well prepared, not well taken care of, and it's probably got some sort of a foodborne illness in it now. You have to eat that. You go out and you just work yourself to death and your kids. You have to have 10 kids so that they can help work it, clear until dark. And then dad gets a shower. You heard the expression, throw the baby out with the bathwater. How it works is dad gets a bath, and then the oldest son gets a bath, and usually mom's about 3 or 4, but you go through the children and in the same bathtub. And so when it's done, the youngest, the baby, is the last one in there, and the theory behind it is the bathwater is now so dirty you can't see a human in there, so don't throw a baby out with the bathwater. That really has some historical connotation. And so that's what we did. That's what Americans did. That's what European nations did. That's what people did. That's what humanity did. And now we've got so much leisure time, and we donate it all to terrible thoughts about other people, and why is this person making bad decisions, and why is that person making bad decisions? Let's donate all that leisure time into how can we make the world a better place for all of us, and more importantly, for our kids.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm back. Is that okay? If you guys raise your hands, we will take questions. While you're doing that, I guess I'll ask a question, but please raise your hands and then I'll call on you. And then unmute yourself when you talk, of course. I have a question. Why did you leave so many? You had 50 interviews. Why did you only show 4 people? I'm shocked. What was the thinking behind leaving like 46 people on the cutting room floor? Not that I'm one of them and it matters to me, but I'm just curious, like, why did you feel that, because I thought the whole point was you were asking people why Trump, and then they were gonna tell us why Trump, but then you didn't let them speak. Why?
Well, because first of all, you are in the trailer that is
That's okay, I don't care. Don't worry about me.
No. So that was actually a trailer where we had more interviews respond exactly to that question with very short snippets. The problem is obviously if you talk for an hour, you have a lot of material that is very hard to fit into this format here. And then all of a sudden you have a video of like
2 days.
2.5 hours. Let me put it that way.
Can I suggest that you just like splice together like random things, because that would be interesting to hear, like just people randomly talking about why they voted for Trump or what they thought was appealing about him. It just seems to me like so much of the work you did, you left on the cutting room floor. I mean, and then you replayed, you gave like 3 minutes, 4 minutes to people who, it's okay, but like the guy at the end, like why he wasn't even talking about why Trump. I'm just wondering, like, that's just my suggestion. It's like it's taking way too long to cut to the chase. Like let the people speak. You didn't let them speak.
Well, but that's why you need to buy the book, and I mean making that.
Let them speak.
Yes, that's where they will speak, and we will make again a longer movie, but like making the movie is way more work than we expected. And I mean, you can clearly tell from the video who here is the visual expert. It's clearly not me.
And I did enjoy it. I enjoyed what I saw. It's just that it kind of wasn't why Trump. That's all I'm saying. It's like, it just didn't, like, I enjoyed what I watched, but I didn't think that, I just want to make it clear that I didn't think it was why Trump. But okay, let's move on. Sarah, you're up.
Yeah, so thanks for doing that. I really enjoyed that. I'm looking forward to the book. That looks like a really cool project. So one thing that I just wanted to kind of throw out to other political scientists that are here that, I basically, in my department, they joke that now I'm basically just an Americanist because ever since 2016, I've been just writing papers about Trump, basically. But one thing that always sticks out to me, and that I wonder if this exists elsewhere, is this kind of American notion that having no political experience is actually a good thing in someone running for office. Like, no one would say, like, oh yeah, this doctor's never been in an OR before, but I want them to cut me open. I mean, like, it's just baffling to me that that is seen as such a good thing. And like I said, I'm kind of new to the American politics subfield. I was trained in IR conflict stuff, but it just seems really like interesting to me that that's something people always go for when they talk about Trump, is that, oh, he's from the outside. But how people think an outsider could be good at, cutting deals in the Beltway is beyond me. But anyway, so I just wondered if you, in talking with people in other countries, if that same pattern emerges like it does here, because that seems to be a very common refrain among Trump supporters, that they like that he's an outsider. And I just didn't know if that was something that was true in other countries where we see similar leaders kind of coming to power.
All right, well, thank you for the questions. Yes, it is kind of odd that like lack of experience is basically sort of a quality. I think it shows how sick and tired people are of sort of de-establishment, right? And I mean, that then makes a bit more sense, right? Because people are worried about corruption. People already had problems with the Kennedy family. Now we have a Clinton clan, sort of like all career politicians. And what we, I think what Jeremy explained in his audio comment, the same actually worked for Obama, right? So it's not just on the Republican side that people sort of value this.
Obama, see, to me, that was just like a jarring case, because Obama was like clearly seen as this rising star within the Democratic Party, and that like higher ranking senators and more experienced senators picked him and encouraged him to run for the president. Like, to me, I was like, Obama is nothing, nothing like Trump. He wanted to be a career politician and was good at it. So I mean, that person is certainly entitled to their opinion, but to me, I was just like, the only reason why Obama, to me, paved the path for Trump is that people, like the racism in America, was like, oh no, you elected this black man. Now we're going to completely go in the other direction because we are not happy with that. But anyway, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but.
Oh, no, you absolutely have a point. I mean, Obama still did not have actually a lot of experience at this point. I mean, that is just a fact, but I absolutely take your point. And yes, it's definitely not possible to become Chancellor of Germany in that fashion, right? You have to have the experience. There is no way you can actually get through the system to get to a position where you become a chancellor. So I think that is something that's pretty unique to the United States. Though I'm not familiar with other regions of the world as much as maybe Europe and the US.
Sarah, could I just follow up on that?
Sure.
You said that Americans were sick of voting for a black man, didn't you? Did you not?
No, I think that was a reaction to, like, when Obama became president, I think people were like, wow, look at how progressive this country is. Now we've like elected a black man to the presidency. Nobody ever thought this would happen. Like, I remember on the eve of the 2016 election, I was out with my running group and I said, no country that elected Barack Obama would elect Donald Trump. And then of course I was proven wrong the next day. And my friends who study race and politics were like, of course, like, what did you expect? Like, people who were not comfortable with the idea of a black man in the White House are now reacting to that with someone who seems to share their opinions. I don't think that explains why everyone voted for Trump.
No, because many of the Obama voters were the ones who voted for Trump. So I just don't like, I just heard you say something like they didn't want to vote for a black man. They couldn't vote for him. He wasn't on the ballot. They already voted for him twice. He can't run for a third term. So why?
Oh no, I agree with that.
Americans, they couldn't vote for him.
I think there's some Americans though that came out to vote for Trump who did not vote for Obama, who hadn't voted in many previous elections because of the fact they were like, no, this country's going in the wrong direction. This guy is the one to put it back on track. Okay. I agree with you. There are Obama Trump voters. I don't pretend to understand
many.
But,
no, but I mean, I just wanted to, just for the record, to clarify that Obama was not on the ballot, so they couldn't vote for another black man.
True.
So,
No, absolutely.
that's
I
not
totally
what you
agree.
said. I just want to make sure, because there's a lot of things people are saying that I just don't understand. But
No, I totally agree with you that Obama was not on the ballot in
okay,
2016.
that's good. I'm just glad that we clarified that.
Yes.
Okay. Katie, you're up.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for this great presentation. And yeah, it's good to see you again, Tim, and to be back at Mershon, one of my favorite places. First, I want to say just, Sonja, your photography is beautiful, like just absolutely stunning. So I mean, I don't have an artistic eye. I just really enjoyed it. On the topic, so to follow up on one of Sarah's points, and then I have a separate question. So this question about like political inexperience and things like that, like Sarah, I'm sort of half an Americanist sometimes because I work on public opinion. And I guess to me, like the answer to that question sort of exists, right? This is what populism is. Part of it is this anti-elite sentiment, and we've known that since, Lipset in 1960s, right? Like, so we have this like really strong strain of research that looks at exactly this. Like, people are pitting the ordinary folks against the elites, and the elites in this case are career politicians. And so this strain exists definitely throughout Europe, and that's the area of populism research that I know the best. And then certainly in the United States. So I think a lot of people, a lot of comparativists who study this would be entirely unsurprised. The second thing I wanted to ask about is, I guess, as I was watching and as I was hearing sort of the puzzle that motivated the project, my mind goes instantly to like the sort of heaps of public opinion work that we have answering these questions about like where polarization is coming from, about the attractiveness of populist messages, about fear of cultural change and status-based concerns. And I guess I'm wondering how your work sort of complements that, or where do you see like the synergies between what you're doing and some of the existing things that we know from public opinion research that's looking at these questions, so that we can understand how to like fit the more interview style or approach with some of that existing research, because I think that would be just a really interesting thing to hear about and consider.
Wow. Well, thank you for the wonderful feedback. Yeah, I mean, it's been very nice of Randy to invite us to this thing, because partly this is not obviously an academic project in a sense, right? So we're trying to target it towards a broader audience, and we have objectives in the project that are not like legitimate in academia, right? Bringing people back together, like empathizing with one another, and like, but at the same time, we obviously do want to have sort of an academic basis for what we do, or a scholarly basis. Your question though, I have to admit, I have a very difficult time answering, because I'm just not familiar with the particulars of the public opinion work that you cite. I have to just be very honest about that. I do think there is a huge potential for bringing the two together. So I don't see it as like, oh, qualitative interviews are the only way to go. All surveys or public opinion studies are stupid. That's totally, that would be stupid to say that. But I would need a lot more time to actually get into that literature, and I would be really, really happy if we could have a conversation about this after the conference, because that's exactly also what we want to do with Transatlantica. We want to like use this project as a flagship product, and then connect researchers, scholars, and experts across the Atlantic to work on this just general conglomerate of problems. So public opinion experts are more than welcome to get in touch with us.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk further like some other time, but one place you might look just for a sort of instant take that's like directed towards a non-political science audience is the Vavreck Tesler book on it's called like Identity Crisis, and it's specifically about the 2016 election, and it's a popular press, and I think there would be a lot in there that's quite interesting to you.
Thank you.
Bill Woolforth.
Let me join Katie in thanking you for this. This was a great way to start, I think. I loved the whole flow of it. pictures and reminding me of what other parts of the country are like since I can't travel. And one of the sad things about Zoom is I have to put all these sheets over my window so there's not too much light, so I can't look outside at this beautiful country. But my question is, unlike Sarah and Katie, I can't even claim even fake expertise on, or any kind of expertise on American politics. My sole claim to knowledge on Trump and why people support Trump is that, unlike most academics, I'm a gun owner and a hunter. In fact, this is duck season and pheasant season, so the sacrifices I'm making to be here are intense. I just got an email that a friend of mine already took down 12 ducks today, so this is a huge sacrifice being here. But among my friends who are Trump supporters, I don't detect a lot of enthusiasm for the individual, Donald Trump. And I'm just wondering if your research, the interviews you did across all those people, particularly those who are Trump voters, how many of them are actually enthusiastic, really like the guy, think he's just great, as opposed to how many were what might be called anti-Trump voters. In other words, my friends who are Trump supporters, what really motivates them is deep hate for the anti-Trump rhetoric. They love being against people who are against Trump, rather than actually being for Trump. And they get a huge pleasure out of simply kind of being provocatively anti-Trump.
Bill, just one thing. Can you hear me, Bill?
What's that?
Can you hear me? Your mic is really coming in and out. Is there something that you're doing with your microphone? Because you're like, I can barely hear you.
How's this? Is this any better?
Much better.
Oh, yeah. That shows you I took this thing off. It was sitting on my desk. Sorry about that, folks.
Okay.
So basically the argument is how many of your interviewees were less pro-Trump than they were anti-Trump? And that was a long-winded way of getting to that question. Did you find much in your interviews genuine enthusiasm for this person as a leader, as opposed to finding a lot of disdain for the case against Trump?
Well, that's a very good question. And I tried to go through all the interviews in my head, and I have to say that, no, we didn't actually encounter anybody who really just said, we love Trump as a person. I mean, a lot of this is actually, well, interesting that it's all about personality, right? With Trump, people hate him. They don't care what policies he enacts, or they love or support his policies, but they don't really like the guy either, right? So the farmers actually in Nebraska, who we talked to, they were fairly conservative, and they were very supportive of his policies, right? And they were kind of like, yeah, go stick it to Washington and the establishment, you know, nobody should tell us here in Nebraska how to live our lives. But Mary Lou Block, she said it before the interview. She was like, well, yeah, we were not so really hot on Donald Trump at first either. And that's because of his personality, actually, right? So I'm not sure, though, if it's not necessarily then a choice between that and just having anti-Trumpers, as you, I hope I got the antis right. Because, yeah, those people actually like voted for him because of what he proposed in terms of policy. So the personality, we actually always say like, oh, it shouldn't be so much about personality. And in this case, it might actually have been the case for Trump supporters.
Bill, can I ask you, like, what's the motivation for that question? Because I find that, again, I find your take on this extremely orthogonal, to say the least. I mean, Trump's the guy that has 35,000 cheering fans. I mean, why are you posing the question as people are anti-Trump rather than pro-Trump? Why is it so difficult to believe when a guy is packing stadiums that people could actually like Trump? Now, I'm sure there might be a sliver of people who said what you said, but why are you focusing on them? I don't get it.
Oh, it's probably a failure of imagination. It's just so hard to imagine that anybody actually likes the guy.
Why?
So I will,
Television star.
aside from you, I mean, I'll confess to perhaps a lack of imagination, but I think of a lot of that. Again, these are the people I know who are
You gotta get
strong
out
Republicans,
more.
strong Second Amendment people. They support Trump, but they don't really like him. I think that the screaming, the flags and the enthusiasm in the hall is often precisely directed against the contempt that Trump is expressing towards what they conceive to be liberal establishment. So they're cheering him as he is reflecting their own disdain for the political elite and the politically correct discourse, rather than really liking the guy. Anyway, that's a hypothesis. I'm just.
But Bill, I just find that it's just such a strange way of You say like you have never met anyone that loves Trump, but he packs stadiums. You guys just don't know anybody outside of the elite, is what you're saying. I mean, would you not agree that he has the strongest following of any president? And if you don't agree, tell me who has a stronger following than Trump does in terms of like enthusiasm. If this were a race about enthusiasm, it's over. Biden gets 5 people to show up. The only reason people are going to vote for Biden is they hate Trump.
Really want to go here? I don't think we know. Yeah, I mean, because it's so weird right now, we don't know. I mean, but like I could, point back to 2008 when Obama was running and people would stand in the rain for hours to hear him speak.
People loved Obama, but I would never say, did you hear people on the right saying people are only voting for Obama because they're anti-Obama? The people who liked Obama truly liked Obama. I agree, he had a charisma, but you can't give that to Trump, no?
But I think to Bill's point, what you see at these Trump rallies, which is puzzling, like my students and I did this project recently where we went through Trump's Twitter feed and we looked at the words that he says the most. And the thing he talked is Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, like these people who are no longer in office, right? But that's what rallies people. I think that's what they cheer for at the audience when he's talking about how their shared hate for.
So don't you think that that's true of any I don't know. I
don't know that presidents talk about their.
Let me just, Randy, you do what many of my many friends who are Trump supporters do, which is you're trying to have your cake and eat it. On the one hand, this guy's, there's never been anybody like him. He's completely new. He's utterly anti-establishment. On the other hand, you're trying to act like he's a normal politician and like support for him that can be comparable to other politicians. Wow. The fact is he's unusual, and therefore it wouldn't be surprising if some of those crowds are applauding him for unusual reasons, namely less enthusiasm about the man and more enthusiasm about the anti-establishment or anti-elite rhetoric that he is espousing.
Okay, but man, that's the man. Why do you separate the man from his rhetoric in Trump's case, but you don't do that for anyone else? I was saying it's a very strange take to me to have, that's all I'm pointing out. This is just a conference. We're all here to debate. It's just a very, very incredibly strange take from of course, the universities where 98% are Democrats, that you think that Trump, the reason people are voting for Trump is they're anti-Trump. That's unbelievable. But
it's
that's
a strange take. He's a strange leader. He's unusual.
Yes,
come on, man.
He's loved by the people who support him.
Recognize it.
But why? Because you're strange, or can't you be loved? But all right, let's move on. Christopher, I mean, I think it's interesting that you say that. That's all. I'm just, as the moderator, I'm trying to get this out of you. But okay, Chris Ray.
Hey, thanks. Just very quickly to that point, right? I mean, there are an awful lot of people who voted for Donald Trump. We're looking at, even in the worst anti-Trump polls, right? We're still getting like some 45% of people are voting for Trump. That's a big group. It could contain both people who are anti-Trump and people who really legitimately love Donald Trump. But anyway, so bring it back to Tim and Sonja. So one of the things that really struck me listening to some of the interviews, right? Right now we have this moment of extreme polarization. And it's something we talk a lot, particularly in academia, like hyperpolarization in the United States. On the other hand, though, it seems that there has always been this sort of idea of an inherent American virtue of moderation in forming your political views. And I don't mean here centrism, right? Like a confluence of policies that are in between conservative and liberal, but just like the behavior itself of, you know, moderating, you know, I take both sides of something, right? I think of myself. I think for myself. I don't buy the party line. And what struck me here is that seemed to show up to me a little bit in the few interviews that we saw. I think Jeremy, it was from Utah, spoke about this idea of Americans actually agreeing on a lot of things, that, you know, it's always about finding this middle ground. Martha Nussbaum, Martha Nussbaum here, which is very cool. She put it in terms of, perhaps not surprisingly, this fundamental need to hear the other side and allow these discussions to take place. And so I'm wondering if you saw in the other interviews more of this idea come out, that there is something inherently good about, you know, having this active moderation in the way that you form political opinions, and how then if we do see that showing up in a lot of voters, and I think other, you know, voting ethnographic work tends to identify this, how we square that with how intensely polarized we are, if there was any insight into that.
Huh. Yeah, thank you for the question, Chris. Let me think for a moment. Yes, I definitely think that a big group of the people we talk to would say that, yeah, this is a virtue in politics, right? To have that sort of moderation. The disconnect then to the polarization is partially also, I think, because there's a difference between the virtual reality and the reality. So we talked to someone, actually a friend of mine in Wheaton, outside of Chicago, and I was asking him, so, you know, what do you think about this like intense like polarization of the American like public? And he's like, what polarization? There's no polarization. And then I realized he's not on Facebook or anything, you know? So, and he doesn't read the news either. He plays video games. And he talks to his neighbors and mows the lawn. So I think, so that's definitely one disconnect, right? The polarization we see, and especially academics see, is because we constantly read the news, we constantly read, and the news sort of feed on that, right? Media and New York Times and other outlets feed on that. However, we also talked to a number of people who actually said the time for moderation is over, right? You know, whatever the other side, we don't care. They're like the devil. They can all burn in hell. And you can have this on both sides, right? So there was a sizable number of people, and I'm being crass here, but there was a sizable number of people who also were like, no, the other side is just wrong. And I don't want to talk to them, right? Some regretted that, you know. A lot of people actually said, yeah, we talked to a couple that doesn't talk about politics anymore because the wife is, you know, anti-Trump and the husband is pro-Trump. So they don't talk about politics anymore at all. And that we heard from a lot of people. So, but I think it would be nicer if people do sort of keep that moderate.
I have John Mueller up, but he's got his hand up, but I don't think I can actually call him because I don't think he can talk. Is that right? So, John, type your question in the Q&A box and I'll read it. Okay. I have one in the Q&A.
Allow him to talk, Randy.
Oh, he can. Good. Go ahead, John. Come in. You have to unmute. And I'd like to see if you could put some audio on. Well, Sonja, I want to hear from you while we're waiting for John. Thoughts? Just any thoughts. Chime in. We want to hear you. You're muted. You're muted.
Oh, God.
There you go.
I wasn't expecting that.
Some thoughts, just anything?
Just anything. Just
Well,
anything.
while you answer, John, go ahead. Just unmute yourself and go ahead. We have technical problems here. Kelly, are you on this?
Yes, I am. I just chatted John
Okay,
and
well,
let
we'll
him
wait
know
for
I
John.
gave him the ability to speak if he'd like to ask his question. So we'll just hang tight for him, but you can move forward with other questions until he pops on.
Okay, till we get it. So, okay, so I want to hear, Sonja, tell us what your thoughts are about why people voted for Trump. What if you had to, like, you were there, tell us, unmute yourself. Yeah.
Why people vote for Trump? I don't know why they vote for Trump, because that's, so many say they're frustrated, and that's the main reason why they voted for Trump. But I have to admit, when you're there taking pictures, you're so much concentrating on that. So so many interviews, I was not able to hear everything about this, what the people said, because I was concentrating on the environment. I was concentrating on people, what they look like, so yeah.
Are you like in the process of editing all this tape that you have? Like, is that what you're in the process of doing?
So the interviews, that's his part, and I'm the visual person. So
you're not editing the interviews, you're
No.
just taking but you did all the visual part.
I did all the visuals, yes.
Well, that's
and
great.
putting the things together. And of course, I was not very much interested in politics, before I met him. Of course, I read the news and I encountered things, but I was, more of an artist and photographer. So,
Yeah.
and, but at the very first time I thought, okay, like, what's going on? People are like, are they mad, voting for Trump? But when I actually went to the stage with Tim, I kind of, changed my opinion, because I saw people, and I saw landscapes, and the way people lived, and then I could understand why they actually did it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I kind of changed my opinion, because for the very first time, it was like what media told people, so I was just like, that was my opinion, like what media said. And then when I was actually there, it changed. It just changed, so I cannot even say that, oh, Trump is just awful, because what people just say is that, all they see is this person being awful.
Yeah.
But and with Obama, everybody was, oh, she's so wonderful. But what they don't see is what is behind that,
Yeah. I agree with you entirely. John, can you get on?
I think I'm on. Can you hear me now?
Good, yeah.
Okay, two very quick questions. One is that one foreign policy issue that was big in the campaign was immigration, even though it's not technically a foreign policy issue. Before the election, the support for dealing with immigration, in other words, it was going up among Republicans. And Trump obviously jumped on that big time. He's now built 200 feet of new wall and presumably gotten the Mexicans to pay for it. In addition, the other question is it somewhat awkward for your project that Hillary actually won the election?
What was that second one?
Hillary won the election.
She didn't win the election. Where did you get that?
Have you looked at the popular vote?
Oh my gosh, John, I can't believe you say something like that. Like, if you're a Republican in California and New York, you don't vote. It's called an electron. It's like saying a team won because they had more hits than the other team, but they scored 10 fewer runs.
Yeah, that's
you can't
right.
possibly be using that
If it hadn't been the Electoral College, even more people would have voted for Hillary.
Oh my gosh. Okay, go ahead.
Like my sisters.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I have to say I kind of agree with Randy on this in terms of, Hillary won the popular vote, but you do win the election by winning the Electoral College.
But your whole film is about people. It's not about Thomas and Jefferson and the brain dead.
John, have you ever lived in New York City and voted? Have you been a Republican in New York City who had a chance to vote? If you went to the polls, you're very irrational, I gotta tell you.
The same thing is true for Democrats.
Why?
Because you know who's going to win.
Well, okay, but they wind up going. They like to celebrate and win, you know? All right. Go ahead.
My sister's in California, and she is a
Let's just keep
diehard
spreading,
Republican who hates
okay,
Trump.
Hillary won the
She
election.
hated Hillary, so she voted for a third-party candidate.
Okay, she won. You're right.
Immigration?
Yes. What exactly was your question there on immigration?
Immigration was a huge issue in the election. It didn't come up in your film at all. It's like people can't even remember the issue.
Yes, that's true. Actually, when we did the trip, it was a big issue, right? And I will make a note of this. Probably didn't come into the presentation because right now it's not as big of an issue, and we only have so much space and time in a 40-minute presentation. But immigration was a big issue when we did the first 2-month road trip to the United States, right? We had there was the issue of the containment or of immigrant children. So people were very upset about that. We talked to some conservatives who immediately started pointing out that they're not racist, that they're not racist, but they just want immigration to work according to the rules, and that illegal immigration was a problem. So it didn't go much further than that, you know, a lot of left-leaning liberals were like, this is terrible, there are concentration camps where he imprisons children, and that Republicans or more pro-Trump people would say that, yeah, immigration itself is not necessarily a problem, it's just illegal immigration. So
That makes sense. That makes perfect sense. I know it's disappointing to liberals to believe that the left, the right aren't against immigration because they're racist, but they just believe in laws. But you know, anyway, I'm glad that that's what you found.
This. That's just not true.
What's not true?
Look at Jens Heimüller's work on this conjoint experiments showing that in fact people do discriminate based on the race and identity of the immigrants coming in. They control for everything else, including the type of work the person's going to do, including whether or not they follow the laws. So like, again, there's research on this that we can turn to, and it has many answers.
But right, I'm just saying that his answer must disappoint. I don't think, regardless of the research, that Republicans, for the most part, were racist, and that's the reason that they didn't want immigration. I think they made a distinction between illegal immigration and legal immigration, and something like 98% of legal immigrants to this country are non-white. But anyway, I'm not saying that there isn't research out there. I'm sure there is research out there. But does it show that people who voted for Trump are racist? Okay, well, there you go. Then they must be. Okay, that's good. I'm glad. We're going to have a debate. That's good. This is something academia doesn't usually have. Imagine if I weren't here, then all you would hear is the left. Okay, thank you so much, Tim and Sonja. That was fantastic. And yeah, really great stuff. And I look forward to the film and you winning, being an entry in the Cannes Film Festival. And eventually going on to stardom. Yeah.
Thank you, everybody, for the questions.
Thank you.